Hey guys, it's me, Seren, back with another video. I am filming in a different space right now, so I'm sure the sound is going to be a little bit funny. Um, this is probably going to end up being my new space that I film in, so I don't know, just bear with me if it sounds like really loud or like echoey in here. But I wanted to film this video as a follow up to the most recent episode of The Black Americans, which went up on Monday. That was episode 5, part 1. So shout outs to Monica yet again, for coming out and filming. You guys were like really into this conversation about names. I also posted about it on Instagram. I got a lot of really interesting comments about it here on YouTube. And so I wanted to film a follow-up video where I discussed some of you guys' comments and I talked about them because the stuff you guys had to say was really super interesting. So should BAs change our slave last names was the question. Hopefully you guys can see that. Hopefully I remember to turn it around. We'll see. And that got a lot of really interesting responses. I'm going to just read you guys some of them and discuss some of these points that people brought up. I see my last name as an heirloom, so it's a no from me, dog. Yes and no, said somebody else. I am confusion. Well, I think it's a super personal choice and it's a case-by-case thing. A lot of history and pain comes with it. And I responded, I agree that it's definitely very personal and something that everyone has to sit with for themselves. Somebody else was like, no, it's too late. LOL, my surname no longer reminds me of slavery, but of my parents, grandparents, etc. My family has accomplished a lot under my family names. A lot of people were bringing this up, the fact that they feel like at this point their names are more associated with their own families than even with slavery, which even got brought up a little bit later on, where somebody said, the last names that we have, white people don't even have anymore, so they're kind of unique to us at this point, like Green, Johnson, Spells, Jackson, etc. And I wrote back, I said, now this is an interesting point. Green, Johnson, Jackson, etc. are seen as DACS names at this moment in time, right? Like even when we joke around about like niggas and stuff like that, it'll always be names like Johnson or Jackson. It's like those type of names really are not even associated with, white plantations or plantation owners anymore. And somebody else said, I have never met a white person with the last name Jackson. I said the same thing. I've never met a white person in real life with the last name Jackson. The only Jackson that we know of that's white is Andrew Jackson, who was super genocidal, 7th president of the United States, on our $20 bill, rich slave owner, as well as led a campaign of war and genocide against the Native Americans. My computer just went to sleep. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. I have met white Johnsons and Greens, but I know more Johnsons and Greens who are black. This name discussion is amazing. I said, I have never in my life met a white Johnson ever. And the person said Johnson and Johnson. I was like, that does not count. But it's interesting, right? When you start thinking about how over time, these types of names can also start to be associated with something else, right? How they started to be associated with blackness as opposed to whiteness, right? And somebody even left a comment on that. They said, we stay reclaiming shit and renaming and asserting our identity, which again, I thought was a really interesting sort of take on it, in that it's like, just like how we reclaimed the N-word, right? Now, again, that is a personal choice. Ultimately, this name stuff comes down to like personal choices and how you feel personally about it. Just like how some people be like, I don't want to use the N-word, I'm not feeling it, that's not what I do, da-da-da-da-da. When we're talking about reclamation and reclaiming of things, it is kind of an interesting concept to think about a name as something else that Black Americans, descendants of American chattel slavery, have reclaimed at this point in time and asserted it as our own identity. I thought that was an extremely, extremely, extremely interesting point. If you can see it, yes, you can. There it goes. A lot of people also brought up something that we've discussed on this channel before, which is that for some reason, whenever we're talking about being descendants of slavery and colonization and all these things, it seems like this burden of shame really falls on the shoulders of descendants of American chattel slavery, like as if other ethnic groups did not go through slavery and colonization. And somebody brought up a point about how Latinos carry their oppressors' surnames as well, which I thought was a really interesting comment, and a lot of people have been bringing that up, how like Spanish last names like Ramirez or Rodriguez or Gomez or Gutierrez, or the ones with Z's are coming to mind for some reason, I don't know why, Peralta, you know, have these Hispanic or Spanish, Spaniard, and or even Latino last names are they're colonizer names, right? They're colonizer language. Like Spanish is the language of Spain, of the Spaniards that were colonizers, that colonized, you know, the indigenous peoples across North America, across Central America, across South America. And that's how these people even ended up with these names, ended up with this language, Spanish, and ended up with this religion, Catholicism, part of which is what sort of unites them under this ethnicity. That is the ethnicity and the language and the names of colonizers. And yet it is seen as perfectly appropriate for them to carry these names, and there's no question of these names, no question of should they change these names, no question of should they feel shame over these names. You know, Cruz, like Ted Cruz, there's no, well, he's white, but you know, like there's no question about that. And yet when we start talking about descendants of American chattel slavery, we sort of get to all this, oh my God, you guys should be ashamed. You know, you have these slave names, these colonizer last names, and it's sort of like, what is your name? What is your name? What is your name? And sort of piggybacking off of that point, a lot of people also brought up how Africans that have been colonized changed their names as well. So I said, should BAs change our slave last names? And somebody said, hell no. The funny thing is Africans changed their first names to European standards to fit in. And a lot of people kind of started piggybacking off of that as well. And somebody said, this is true. Also, loads of Africans have slave last names too because of colonialism, and slave first names as well. Somebody else. Honestly, we as CAs, Continental Africans, need to decolonize our minds collectively. I feel like my generation is at a schism. Folks who are pushing to do better and undo the mistakes of past generations, and folks who are going to carry on the same colonizer mindset. We really have to mentally detach ourselves from the Eurocentric way of thinking. Like the way we worship the Brits, the monarchy really isn't cool at all. We have so much shit in our home nations to deal with. And I said, it's almost like a reverse thing happening there. And I thought of the name Elizabeth. I've met many foreign blacks and continental Africans with the first name of Elizabeth because they worshiped the British monarchy and they were named after Queen Elizabeth. And so I said, it's almost like a reverse thing happening there. Black Americans tend to have our slave last names and more ethnic first names that our parents give us. Like the whole stereotype is that Black Americans have ghetto first names. Foreign blacks tend to have more English first names and their African, quote-unquote, last names due to colonization. It's interesting to me that it's seen as more appropriate to be Elizabeth Olatunde, English first name, than Jamil Johnson, English last name, which is what I put. You guys see that? Hopefully you can. Someone said, right, when you think about your point about Elizabeth Olatunde being cool, but Jamil Johnson not being okay, it also shows that anti-Black American xenophobia that you discussed in the episode. Gosh, it's taking so long. There we go. And someone else replied, I definitely think that goes back to the ideas of Black Americans still molding a legacy in modern times, and we are not taken seriously by others. So us having made up names is not to be taken seriously, plus the ghetto stigma attached to names that we have created and adopted. I say adopted because there are first names that are deemed Black or ghetto that actually have history from other cultures like Malik, Tashina, Tyrone, etc. And somebody else sort of piggybacked off of this commentary and said, whites know when they hire Olamide or any foreign black they are getting conformity. And I thought that was a really interesting comment as well, because that kind of plays into when we start talking about infrastructure, right? When we start talking about a job application or a school application, and what is the meaning behind these names? What type of immediate idea does these names confer? And again, it's very interesting that, let's say, a Latinx or Hispanic last name, which is also a name that is a result of slavery and colonization, is not seen the same way as a name like, say, Jamil Johnson. One is seen as a little bit more appropriate than the other one, right? A name like Elizabeth Olatunde, which is literally a name I made up, I don't know anyone by that name, is seen as a little bit more appropriate because you have this English, this acceptable English first name with this obviously non-American last name than a Jamil Johnson. Once we start sort of getting into this, it's really interesting. So here's the comment. And then somebody replied to that comment. That is exactly what it is. There's no feeling of, I know I owe these niggas something with those types of names. It is a blank slate relationship when it comes to foreign blacks. And I said, so the foreign black name is a part of the guilty-free conscience for whites, aka the racial unshackling concept, which we have also talked about before, right? If you don't have a stereotypically DACS name, there's a lot of being freed from certain types of stereotypes, right? Basically, it's a question of who is your daddy or who do you belong to. Maybe there's a comfort knowing an FB can always be maybe it's a comfort of knowing an FB can always go back when white folks are done with them or when they are done with the country. Jamil will be sticking around here with the rest of the Johnsons. Another super, super interesting point. So back on should we change our slave last names, somebody else said, no. For number one, we don't even know exactly what part of Africa we come from. Black Americans are ethnically diverse. So what are we gonna do? Pick an African random name out of a hat without even knowing the history and meaning of that name? LOL. And I was like, we discussed exactly this on the episode. Like, I'm not gonna just... People talk, and it's interesting because somebody even left a comment on the video where they wrote this whole dialogue about how, like, names are really important and how, like, descendants of American chattel slavery need to, like, drop our slave last names because, like, names are extremely important and they have all this meaning. And then they ended their paragraph, they ended their dissertation by saying, all descendants of American chattel slavery should just pick an African name at random and change it to that. And I was like, how can you write this whole dissertation on the importance of names and then at the end of it basically state that the African names are not important, they don't matter, they don't have meaning, we could just grab one out of a hat and adopt it? I personally don't think that that's appropriate. I do think that names have meaning. I do think that names have power. I do think it's a personal choice if you want to change your name or not. That's something that every descendant of American chattel slavery has to decide for themselves. Me personally, I would not change my name. I'm gonna read a few more comments and really get to why. But someone asked me, they were like, if you did change your name, would you pick a foreign black name or would you change it to something like X? And I said, for me personally, I would change it to just a X. And I would pick that, and I feel like, and I've talked about this with other people, like friends and stuff in real life, and a lot of people that I know also said that they would pick an X or that they would just make up a completely original, unique, last name for themselves because they feel like it wouldn't be appropriate to just be like grab bagging at African names when we do not understand the significance of the names, and also that the completely new surname can also be a representation of us as a completely new ethnic group within the diaspora, which I really like. And I also feel like for me, I would take on the X because as a people that, were enslaved, that, could not read or write, when you can't read or write, if they ask you to sign something, you put an X, right? So for myself, I feel like that symbolism for me would be important. That's what I would do, but I choose to keep my name. And I'm gonna go ahead and read you guys why, because I explained it to someone in the comments. So somebody said, realistically, it is unlikely the masses of people would do this, change their name, anytime soon. It took centuries of oppression and coercion for our names to be changed, so I'd expect it to take a long time for that to be undone. Those who can and are willing to put up with the legal administrative BS to change theirs should, but everyone as a whole, even if they don't change their last name, should be honest enough to accept that European names are a legacy and remnant of slavery. And I replied, I said, I think everyone is aware that they are remnants of slavery. I think the question is, how do we personally feel about that? I think it's deeply personal, so it's something that every DACS has to decide for themselves. I won't agree that everyone who can and are willing to put up with legal administrative BS to change their name should. I don't think anyone should change their name. It all depends on perspective, because from my perspective, my name is a legacy of survival. That's how I feel about my name. That's what it represents to me. I don't feel any shame about my name being a remnant of slavery. As I've talked about before, everything about myself as a descendant of American chattel slavery, I choose to view it as my lineage and my legacy as a survivor, right? That's my personal choice. I like my name. I'm proud of my name. I would keep my name. That's just me. More comments. Having an African or ethnic name just makes it way easier for white people to discriminate against us as DACS for jobs and stuff because of our names. They already do it now with black stereotypical sounding names. I agree, it's definitely a personal choice. Personally, I feel no attachment to my last name, but I do acknowledge that it serves as a reminder, which I'm not ashamed of. I have, however, seen people change their last names and shame other Black people, DACS, for not doing so, and I feel like even that tactic is to make us feel ashamed of the legacy of slavery, and I said that's a great point. I thought that was a great point. I don't think anyone in the diaspora should make such a decision rashly. Many people aren't aware, but not all slaves took the last name of their master. Sometimes they chose the name of a highly respected elder slave as their last name. That's why some people might have trouble tracking their name down to a plantation. Aside from that, I don't think anyone should find shame in being the descendant of slaves. And that includes last names, because last names have a lot of history in them. A lot of people have been talking about the history and feeling like, well, my family accomplished a lot under this name. I am reclaiming the name. I'm reclaiming the ownership of the name. I'm reclaiming my identity of this name. I think if someone were to decide to change their last name that they perceive to be a slave name, they should at least write it down or document it and do their genealogy first and see where their family came from so they won't ever forget what their family went through and where. A lot of people have been saying that these names also serve as reminders and that they think it's important for us to hold on to these reminders so we don't forget. Because these names connect us to the plantations our ancestors lived and died on. I know which ones my family comes from. I think other descendants of slavery should too. Excellent point, excellent point. On the flip side, somebody else said, yes, it would feel so liberating, but it's expensive. And I asked this person, I said, what specifically about it would be liberating for you? And they said they feel like dropping the name is what would allow them to reclaim themselves and reclaim their identity, which is a perfectly valid viewpoint. So yet again, it's really all about how you feel on this topic personally. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to this one. This one is actually very individual. And a lot of people said, like, that they want to, or that they've always wanted to, or that what's stopped them from doing it is just like the money aspect of it. A lot of men also chimed in with the perspective that I thought was really, really great. So this was one man that said, it's a personal decision for every individual DACS, but for me, I would, not because of shame. I just view the names as literal property deeds of my ancestors' enslavement or property status. Might just be my ego as a man, but I'm not wearing some little white boy's name and passing it down to kids, wife, etc. Also, I wouldn't change it to an African name either. AA's then created thousands of first names. I can create a surname distinct and specific for me and my family, which I thought was a wonderful perspective. Like, I'm not, can I see? There it goes. Like, I'm not a man, so that's not a perspective that I can give. Another opinion that is different from mine, but is definitely 100% valid. Wonderful perspective. And again, on the flip side, another man left a comment that was like the opposite of that, stating why they would want to keep the name. As a man who might want to have kids in the future, my kids will naturally take my last name, whether I'm married or not. So how will they navigate the world if I make up a name? How will they navigate the world having this ethnic last name without any connection to that ethnicity? And then I replied, I said, that's the part about picking random ethnic or African last names that I do not like. We don't know what those names mean or signify. I don't think it's appropriate personally. At least I know where this last name that I have currently came from. And I feel like I can stand in that. I can stand in that, me personally. I don't see the point. To me, it'll feel like I'm trying to smudge my identity to blend in with people who probably wouldn't accept me anyway. Buying a red bandana don't make you a blood. One of you guys also left a comment on the video on YouTube saying that you love your last name because, again, the legacy and the reminder that it serves. They were like that they love meeting white people with the same last name as them and making them uncomfortable because the white person will be like, maybe we're cousins. And you that left the comment, you know who you are. You said you'd be like, or maybe, Zoom, or maybe. And then somebody replied, Paul Mooney had a bit where he would say, white folks love to look at their family tree, but just look, because if they shake it, a nigga will fall out, which is just like, that's real, right? Like, that's real fucking talk. That's real talk. Another one, I say no as well. I think my last name is not only deeply cultural and historical in terms of my family and where we come from, but it's also a political statement as well. White people don't get to have the satisfaction of not dealing with or understanding what they did to me. So again, this is like, no, we're gonna continue to hold on to these names. We're gonna continue to serve as living legacies and reminders of what happened, because y'all niggas don't need to motherfucking forget. My last name, this person put their name, so I X'd it out. My last name is a reminder of my heritage and my oppression. I think white people would like us to change our names so they don't have to deal with what they did. And to me, it goes hand in hand with that go back to Africa sentiment, which was another really interesting point. You guys had some really interesting perspectives on this one. I'm glad you guys enjoyed this topic so much, honestly. Somebody else left a comment saying that they know someone that did this. I personally don't feel like it matters if we did, because we would just go picking which ethnicity or whatever the fuck and go pick some random name with whatever meaning, and that's not solving anything. It's not healing. I personally have met someone who did this and they kept changing their name and they missed their old name. They never assimilated themselves into the culture of the name that they picked, whoever in Africa, because it was an African name that they picked, that they were trying to connect with. So it's pointless. I don't get why the name change. If we come from some Coopers and Williams and Thomases, so be it. I love our last names in the weirdest way. My cousins love their names. I don't think we hate ourselves as much as we think we do. I think we just haven't been told that it's okay to be us and we are searching. And I agreed. I said, it's okay to be us. That's what it boils down to in a lot of ways also, in my opinion, the feeling that it's not okay to be us. We got to change some shit like our names because it's not okay. I have accepted who I am personally, but again, it's personal. So for people that want to reclaim themselves, I also get it. I really do. Really, this is a personal choice, really personal. This name is mine now. It belongs to my ancestors and me. I do not prescribe any whiteness to it. It's not appropriate. We are the DACS. We are a unique ethnic group with different influences from different places. But the majority of our culture and our existence is innovation. There will never be another like us, and we shouldn't change anything. I see a lot of us changing our names to African names or whatever, but in all honesty, it's corny. We are one of the most unique ethnic groups on the planet, and it's time we be proud of that. All of that, which they wrote in caps, all of it, including the slave last names. I think most of the time people get caught up on the word slave and want to shun everything associated with it. Name change is very personal. Our names are important. They mean something. They take on the aura of our experiences, ancestry, and culture. DACS need not feel shame if that's the motivation behind changing their name. Right? I feel like that's like a good thing to pinpoint as well, because someone also said, yes, I would change it because that's like the 20% white blood in us. It's one of the few things I can't deal with as a Black American. And I wrote back to this person. I said, for me personally, there is not anything about being a Black American that I can't deal with. I don't feel any shame about it, especially as it pertains to whiteness or white blood or a white slave name. That shame ain't mine. White blood, white name, etc. I am who I am. I made my peace with that. And a part of who and what I am is a living legacy. I'm not dropping it. And that's how I feel. As I said, it's deeply personal. People had a lot of varying perspectives on this. So if you guys want to continue this conversation a little bit more specifically in the comments, you can go ahead. But I love that you guys had a lot to say about this. It's a really interesting conversation. So food for thought as always. See you guys next time. Peace.